Good to see you. How is it going? Things are good.
No longer with us, so we don't get to.
You're doing great.
I mean, he's not dead. He's no longer with
I
us.
don't see him. I every once in a while.
You see my LinkedIn posts, you know. Helpful.
I follow all of your parking mobility posts. They're very engaging.
Insightful.
Yeah. Me and the 12 other people.
Very nice. Ouch.
Right.
You gotta call your people. You gotta check in.
He took my old office. I mean, that was the best thing I could do for him. Now he's got a better view. And
You've come up quite a lot the last.
Oh, do you really?
I took his office.
How is it? Is it better?
Yeah,
it's a lot better. It's bigger. Yeah.
It was just sitting there. The new person was going to take it. I was like, I did squatters' rights.
I agree with that.
I just sat there. Yeah. But you came up quite a lot in the last couple of weeks.
Oh, good.
Yeah. So
I'm sure all good things. Or all that guy actually didn't know what he was doing. Is this mic
I'm
on?
Sure.
No, we're redoing.
We're just like, oh, we miss him.
No, we're just talking about the messaging of the vision. What's the name now? What is it?
Yes.
What's the name?
I think it's going to be mobility and parking services. So, maps.
That refresh.
Maps. As a geographer, I like that. That's cool. Maps.
That wasn't why we chose it.
Wow. You see how quick he was like. Actually, it's not that good. They're about to get started, I think. Let's catch up afterwards. It was good to see you.
All right. Whatever you want.
I will. I have a couple of meetings with him before I leave. So. I don't. You probably just didn't know.
I just like I thought about it after I hung up with you, and I was like, but thank you. And if I don't talk to you, have a great trip. I'll see you when you get back.
Join me at CMC.
Get engaged and get educated.
Join me at CMC.
Everyone is welcome.
Join me at CMC.
Come grow your relationships.
Join us at CMC.
CMC is real,
authentic conversation.
Engage with curious people.
Plus, we give you access to thought leaders.
Be informed, be inspired.
Through community conversation.
Come here and meet your neighbors.
Be here in the room.
Ask questions.
Get answers.
Connecting people and ideas.
Learn about Columbus.
Who will you see at CMC?
Join me at CMC.
You're invited. Watch us on live stream or in person.
You're invited.
Join the conversation.
You're invited.
Welcome to CMC.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. To carry out its mission, CMC explores public policy issues, current events, and lessons in leadership at forums like this one every week. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Doug Buchanan, the editor-in-chief of Columbus Business First. I'm also a member of the CMC Board of Trustees. I'm so pleased that you're all with us here today. Let's begin by meeting our newest CMC members. We love our new members, so please welcome Nick Belanca with the Marsh McClellan Agency, Yvonne Sherrill with the Ohio Urban Community Action Network, Elizabeth Hess with the Groundwork Group, Donna Marbury and Chris Jones with Warhol and Wall Street, Gabriel Maston with the Columbus Museum of Art, Steve Teakin with Burgess and Nipel, Lori Jadwin, Mayor of the City of Gahanna, and our newest lifetime member, Rebecca Kemper with Columbus Landmarks. Welcome all to CMC. If you're not a member yet, you should become one. By becoming a member, you're helping support civil public discourse, which in the age of cable TV and social media, you know we could use more of. Also, please take a moment to look at the back of your forum flyers. There you'll see the organizations that support the not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club. Half of CMC's annual revenue comes from these supporters, and it's their generosity that helps sustain CMC. To join these sponsors, please see Jane Scott up at the head table or Lainey Cuthbert, who's over there. Yeah. So I'd also like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, HNTB, at the table up front here. We also want to thank the Grange Insurance Audubon Center and its wonderful staff for their ongoing support. Thank you as well to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting today's live stream, which is carried on all of CMC's social media platforms. Let's thank all of those supporting today's forum. All right, on with the program. Could Columbus finally be close to welcoming back passenger trains? In much of the world, a capital city without passenger rail would be unthinkable, yet that's been the case here in Columbus since, yikes, 1979. That year, Central Ohio bet all of its transportation chips on cars, buses, and airplanes, and our transit puzzle has been without passenger trains of any kind since then. I just confirmed with our panelists that we are the country's second largest city without any passenger trains. Does anybody know what the first one is? Yes. Oh, everybody knows it. All right. Very good, though. Very good. Yes, it is Phoenix, and obviously Phoenix sounds like a lovely place, but we're better than them, so we should have that. All right, with the passage of President Biden's infrastructure bill, plus encouraging signals from the DeWine administration, is the stage finally set for Amtrak's return to Central Ohio? Panelists, we look forward to hearing that answer today. Let's please welcome William Murdoch, Executive Director of the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Aaron Rao, Director of Network Development for Amtrak. Aaron Rosiello, Vice Chair of All Aboard Ohio. And our esteemed host, Elizabeth Blunt McCormick, President of Uniglobe Travel Designers. Elizabeth, we look forward to the conversation.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate everyone being here. Just to get the conversation started, I wanted to ask all of you, how did you get involved in the Amtrak expansion, and why do you even care? You want to start here?
All right. Well, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. As I was driving up here from Cincinnati, Ohio, on I-71, it reminded me of my tenure at the Bureau of Workers' Comp for the state of Ohio, where I covered 14 counties in a state car. And I can't tell you the number of hours that I've spent in traffic jams going from Columbus to Cincinnati. I hit 2 rush hours, not 1, but 2 in that period of time. And just have thought and researched that there's got to be another way. I've only come on board in the last 3 years, and I am very passionate about it because not only is it an opportunity for everybody to have choices in how they travel, but it is also an economic development builder of communities and jobs, and I see there's benefits all the way around.
Thanks. And yeah, so I, before taking this job at Amtrak, I've joined Amtrak in July of last year. I worked for the Wisconsin Department of Transportation as the passenger rail director there. and was involved in corridor development, corridor expansion in Wisconsin. And I'm very passionate about this, especially in that position, speaking with communities across the state and understanding at the community level how important this is to them, both from a mobility standpoint and an economic development standpoint.
Yeah, and I work at the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission with my team. You know us as MORPC. We work all over the region to help Central Ohio think about its future and to plan for it and to choose options. And I tell you what, Elizabeth, as a person who grew up in Central Ohio, when we wanted a train or we wanted another option, we had to go other places. And being at a place like MORPC, it's all about providing those options, getting a community what it needs to thrive and grow. And man, passenger rail, Amtrak, this is something we've been working on for a long time.
Thank you so much. Okay, so my next question is, with no passenger rail service or light rail at all, Central Ohio is the second largest city without rail service in the entire country. So give us a little history here. When did we last see passenger trains in Columbus, and how did we get to this point?
Maybe I'll start. It's, as Doug talked earlier, it's been almost 40 years since we've had that option in Central Ohio, 40 years. And in those 40 years, this community has grown so much. And when we think about all of the opportunities that we may have missed over those 40 years, we should check ourselves. It's a great place to live. We're continuing to grow, but we're reaching the point now where we're not the small capital of Ohio that we used to be. We're a much larger metropolitan area. Columbus is the 15th largest city in the country. Yes, we're the second largest city in the country without passenger rail, but we're the largest region. And we sit in the heart of a state that's completely underserved at providing this option to people around the country. And as we're growing, we think that it's important to add this amenity, to add this access, to add this option for folks around Ohio. And I think it's important to notice, yes, and I don't want to pick on Phoenix, it's a lovely town, but over the last 10 years, Central Ohio has added 250,000 people. 250,000 people. When you look at the region of the services that we're talking about for passenger rail right now, that population is bigger than the Phoenix area. It's bigger than Arizona. We're looking at a population in the core of Ohio that is unserved by passenger rail. We really are the largest region in the country that doesn't have access to something basic. And the last thing I'll say is, if we're thinking about our future, we're thinking about how to compete. All of the regions that we are competing with have this option. They've had it, they're improving it. We have some catch up to do. And I think our business case is strong, and adding this, I think, could put us back on track for being competitive for them.
And I just have a quick follow-up question.
Yeah.
So do you think that the appetite is just more appealing because of the fact that our population is growing, because we have these large organizations coming here like Intel? Do you think that's why the conversation is more serious and can happen?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. So one of the roles that we do, and I won't get too technical on the audience, we're transportation planners for Central Ohio. So we are regularly talking to our businesses, our communities, the public about what do we need for the future for our transportation system. And the trend continues to be, when we say, well, what options do you want? They say all of the above. Yes to highways, yes to roads, yes to sidewalks, yes to trails, yes to transit. But the one that resonates the strongest, that continues to grow, is adding passenger rail service to the region.
Yeah, and I would add that, when Amtrak engaged in its planning process in 2021 called Amtrak Connects Us, which was a planned sort of one-time vision to communicate to Congress what could feasibly be achieved with significant funding for intercity passenger rail. We overlaid our Amtrak system with the population across the country, and we saw gaping holes all over the country where we have only one round trip daily service, or we don't have any service. And unfortunately, Ohio was a big one. And so we have one round trip daily service in Cleveland. We have one round trip service in Cincinnati, but both of those, occur late at night. Ohio really is, with this 3CD corridor particularly, is a textbook case where intercity passenger rail can be commercially viable. So we're here to work with all of you, work with the state to hopefully change that.
I am so thankful to have MORPC and Amtrak here so that I can speak to more of the advocacy piece. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and in 1979, I was probably 13 years old. I have never known the option of passenger rail in my adult life. So, when you think about things like demand, I've had conversations, well, there's no demand. Of course there's not. We don't know, at least I'm 57 years old. I have not experienced it in my life. It's a great option. And I think the time is right with the dollars that have been made available and the support of planning through Amtrak. I think that once people realize they have options, that this is going to blow it away economically, as well as help the folks that would like to have options or need assistance with transportation.
So I'm going to kind of rewind for a second. I want to talk about 2010. Governor Kasich famously turned down the $400 million in federal passenger train funding, and that money went to other states. So my question is, what was that money for? And why did the governor turn it down at that time? And was it a mistake? You want to start, Aaron?
Sure. What was that money for? So the beautiful thing is that, back in that day, a whole different day and time, Kasichs day and time, the state had worked really hard to apply for grant money. And there was a change in administration. And once the new administration came in, they just decided they wanted no piece of it. This is a different day. This is totally different in that Amtrak and the FRA have worked together, and they're reaching out saying, hey, we've got this money available. We've got this plan available. You really could benefit. Why not take a look at it? So I can't speak to why it was turned down, but I think it's ripe right now. I think both in the growth of the state, the population, and the projected growth of the state, we're going to need to have some other options. We don't want to be Houston, Texas with 24-lane highways. Can you see that going across Ohio?
No.
I'll just add that I think it's easy to have regrets about what might have happened.
Mm-hmm.
Had we done it back then, we might be in the position of other communities where we'd be looking at going even faster, adding more routes. But I think the more important thing to do is to look forward. And what MORPC's done the last 10 years is learn from the lessons of the last proposal and looking at, well, what could be better? Speed, certainly, predictability, the cost model, looking at the business case. All of those things we've been learning from, and we've spent the last decade preparing for the next opportunity. And I've got a lot of my team members here. We've done studies on this. We've looked at the business case. At the same time, Central Ohio's been growing. I know I'll say it again. We have 250,000 more people than we did for that last proposal. And if you think about the opportunity we have right now, that's a really important thing. If you talk to Arun about his network, I'm sure there are plenty of places around the country that have 250,000 people as a passenger rail stop. Mm-hmm. And this region added 250,000 in the last 10 years. And if you think that the case maybe wasn't as strong back then, it certainly is now. Mm-hmm. And our population estimates that we do at MORPC, we're showing we're going to add about another 750,000 people. So the business case for this service continues to get stronger. And this is all happening at the same time. The federal dollars to invest in passenger rail are at the highest level in Amtrak's history. And when we think about, again, 12 years ago, I think it's just important to look forward at this opportunity that we've been preparing for, a region that's ready for it, and the federal opportunity, the partners that are here. This could be the moment this happens in here.
That's great. And then I had a follow-up question because I wanted to ask you, what were the findings from the study? And is there anything, that we should know about?
Well, sure. So we've done 2 big studies. One was in 2013, where we actually were looking not at 3C and D at the time. We were looking at another really critical route, which is Chicago to Lima, Columbus to Pittsburgh. This goes right past John Glenn International Airport. This is also a pretty compelling corridor. And when we partnered with communities from Chicago all the way through, we saw a really strong business case. We saw again, the potential for passenger ridership is high when you look at the availability of rail. It's high when you look at the communities along the line. It's high. That study really laid out the possibility and compelled us to continue studying that corridor. Fast forward a little bit to 2019 or so, we put together, it's called RSTI. The acronym is Rapid Speed Transportation Initiative, because we felt very strongly that the Columbus region needed options other than cars or planes to connect to other regions around Ohio and around the Midwest and East Coast. And that study, again, confirmed all of these findings, that the business case is there, the routes are there, the business community supports it, and that the public has indicated it's an option that they want. So these studies got us ready and confirmed that we should go after this when the opportunity opens.
And I think too would be important. I mean, when you're flying out of John Glenn, you really can't connect internationally, right? Like there's a short period of time, about 6 weeks right now for spring break, when you can fly nonstop to Cancun. But how incredible would it be if we could just jump on the train, go to O'Hare, and then fly over to Europe, right? So I just think there's so many opportunities, for us really to make travel even easier. And I think train and rail service is the way to go. So Aaron, can you speak more about All Aboard Ohio? And what you want to accomplish and how we can help with that.
Absolutely. One thing that I would like to point out is this year is the 50th anniversary for All Aboard Ohio. So they've been working at this for quite some time. I'm relatively new on board this is now my 3rd year. Basically, our job, the reason we exist, is to increase public awareness, to let folks know about passenger rail and the need for it. For intercity travel as well as local public transit in Ohio. We support research. We love the research that comes out of MORPC and Amtrak, and we love to share that information with stakeholders that are interested in passenger rail and would be affected by passenger rail. We also provide outreach to the public at large, education, and try to help them understand not just the benefits of passenger rail, but the costs matter, and we are in a position right now where the governor has finally taken advantage of the opportunity to have research paid for. So we will all be able to see this business case and to make good decisions based on good information. We support the innovation and development of a balanced transportation system and the ability for people to have choices. We have here a table full of All Aboard Ohio folks, including our executive director, Stu Nicholson. And Stu spends a lot of time getting the word out via the press. He does a wonderful job with that. We also have members. We have lots of members in Ohio. We have chapters. We have chapters in Cleveland, Toledo. Columbus has a very active chapter, as well as a baby chapter in Cincinnati. We just started to get that up and rolling. The idea of the chapters is to bring news to them, information, education, so that they can then go out and spread the word and get more people involved and kind of be the boots on the ground. So how can we help? Membership is greatly appreciated. Anybody that is interested in advocating for passenger rail, we have I don't have a copy here, brochure on your table. We have contact information. Feel free to check out our website. We also have monthly statewide Zoom meetings that you're welcome to attend, that we bring information to our membership. So we are seeking your support, seeking membership, and anybody that would like to reach out, please do.
That's great. So I have another question. So in 2021, Congress passed the bipartisan infrastructure law. So it was President Biden's infrastructure bill, which gave $66 billion for passenger and freight rail improvements. Is that what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is the biggest commitment in the nation's history for improving passenger rail service and adding new routes. And when we're looking at the application that's in front of us right now, it's to get started on accessing those dollars. So that's March 27th. I know I have our train team here in the room. They're laser focused on that deadline. Don't worry, we're all going to make it. But the reason we want to apply now is this set up a process for us as a region, as a state, on these critical routes to do what's called the service development plan. And I know some of you might say, another plan? I thought we need it. But this is the type of, this process sets us up to answer those questions that I know all of us have. Well, how much is it going to cost? How many people are going to ride it? Where are the stations going to go? This is the process to do that. And at the end of that process is access to capital dollars like at a matching rate that we haven't seen before. And so this opportunity is right in front of us, Elizabeth.
That's great.
And I would just add that it's, the $66 billion unprecedented, but it's also new processes being set up at the federal level to create a pipeline of projects that will feed into grant programs for final design and construction. Passenger rail, unlike other modes, doesn't have a dedicated federal formula funding program. Public transit does, highways does, but passenger rail doesn't. This is bringing us closer to that, and it's unprecedented. We've never had a program like this. So it's very exciting, and this is the time to advance these projects on March 27th.
That's great. So Arun, I have another question. So Amtrak currently serves Ohio, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and can you tell us what cities?
Cleveland and Cincinnati. We have the Lakeshore Limited and Capital Limited, which serve Cleveland at night, and then we have the Cardinal, which connects New York, Washington, D.C., Indianapolis, and Chicago, that serves Cincinnati also overnight.
Nice. So I have to ask about the derailment of the freight train in East Palestine. So would that accident have impacted commercial train travel? So we had that opportunity of transportation available?
Sure. So when Amtrak starts a new passenger rail service, we have, I'll start by saying, we have a robust safety process, safety inspection trips, safety system planning that has to be in place before we start a new service. And the very improvements that we need to do, capacity improvements, signaling improvements, grade crossing improvements, the very improvements that are needed to introduce passenger rail are going to enhance safety of these rail corridors. We have passenger trains across the country on shared use freight corridors, and Amtrak is today one of the safest modes of transportation that we have in this country. This will be a shared rights of way with the freight railroads, passenger service in Ohio. But we will have, again, significant capacity improvements and other improvements, and we'll be able to have a very successful shared use service here, working with our host railroad partners.
That's great.
If I can add to it, I mean, I think we all agree what happened in East Palestine was a tragedy. And when we think about the kind of planning we're contemplating in Central Ohio and parts of the state, I think it shines a spotlight on just how important rail safety is. And this isn't just about freight, it's not just about passenger, but part of the dollars and the planning we're going after, to emphasize your point, is to look at these routes and how we can make them safer for freight, make it able to accommodate passenger rail service. This is a really important moment for us. Yes, we want to add passenger rail service, but also we all know that Columbus is a logistics hub, and those freight rail lines are so critical to us, and that safety is paramount. We have a number of member communities in Morpsey here, and I think all of them have freight rail going through their communities. They're concerned about safety, and if anything, going after passenger rail and these fundings will allow us to really look at those corridors and make sure that we can learn from that lesson and make them safer.
That's great. And I think one thing many people don't realize about Amtrak is that Amtrak actually doesn't own most of its tracks. So it uses tracks that belong to freight railroads, right? Okay. So who actually owns the tracks and that a Central Ohio Amtrak would use? Do you have any ideas?
CSX and Norfolk Southern, two Class 1 railroads, own a large part of, the 3CD corridor that we'd be working with.
And like we talked about, in the Northeast, that's owned by Amtrak. So I guess it just depends on where you're located in the U.S. on whether or
Right, yeah,
not.
Amtrak does own railroad on the Northeast corridor, of course, from Boston all the way down to Washington, D.C. We also have a significant stretch of ownership in Michigan between Chicago and Detroit and Pontiac, where we operate at 110 miles an hour. And then there are little other smaller pockets across the country where we own railroads near our depots.
And in addition to that, the route we're studying from Pittsburgh, Columbus to Chicago, most of the segment from Columbus to the Ohio River, so right through Newark, that is owned by the state of Ohio. And so when we're thinking about how to move a project forward there, we have a different ownership structure there that could be advantageous to us.
And could probably provide some jobs, right, and some economic
Well, we hope
improvement.
so. Yes,
Right,
absolutely.
right. Okay, so I think that when we think of, high-speed trains, we probably think of, Europe and Japan. But China has 26,000 miles of high-speed track. So when we're talking about Amtrak here in Central Ohio, are we talking about speeds that are 220 miles per hour, or how fast would our train run? Do we have any information on that?
Yeah, and this process that the state is going to be applying for, the Corridor ID program, will be looking at what is the right fit for Ohio in this corridor, what are the right speeds, what's going to get you, what's going to balance the travel time and the benefits with the capital investment. But the Amtrak speeds can range anywhere between 79 miles an hour, which is sort of standard, to 90 to 110. We go to 110 miles an hour between Chicago and St. Louis, Chicago and Detroit, and stretches of 90 miles an hour in other parts of the country. Of course, on the Northeast Corridor, it is faster, speeds up to 165, but that is Amtrak-owned infrastructure. Anywhere in the range of maximum speeds of 79 to 110 on certain stretches, potentially, we would be looking at as part of this federal corridor program.
That's great. So I want to talk about brass tacks for a second. So say everyone is on board with Amtrak's return to Central Ohio. So what's the cost to the state, both in terms of starting the service up and then in terms of the annual subsidies as well?
Well, I know that's the question everybody wants answered. And the answer to this may not be satisfactory to you, but it's an important step. Is this study that we're applying for the Federal Railroad Administration to do will get to those brass tacks. It will answer the capital investments. It'll look at potential operating. And that's really critical. I do want to pivot back just for a half second, if you'll let me. 79 miles per hour is competitive with car travel. And so if you're a business person or wanting to go to a game in Cleveland or Cincinnati or something like that, whatever the reason, knowing that it's about 2.5 hours, you think of travel and time, that becomes competitive. That becomes something that's going to be really compelling to you. But I have to tell you, you were so modest about the 110 miles per hour. We went up to Michigan last year. They have a legislative delegation. Why am I telling you this? Because it's 110 miles per hour from Ann Arbor west, 110 miles per hour from Lansing west. And as a Buckeye, it absolutely killed me to be on a train parallel with a highway, seeing the cars fade off in the distance as we were speeding behind or ahead of them at 110 miles an hour. That's, I think, the ultimate goal, is to keep improving that speed. But Michigan didn't start there. They started with 79 miles per hour and then built the business case. And I just think the opportunity for Ohio, if you're looking at 100 or 110 miles per hour from Columbus to Delaware on up to Cleveland, that's a game changer. And that's what we want to stay focused on.
And if I could, I would just add, that in addition to travel time, we want to think about productive time while traveling. And the mode of passenger rail is unlike any other mode in terms of what it can provide in productive time. The time that you are on the train is not lost time. You can do whatever you want, whether it's on personal devices, work, rest. There is food and beverage on board while you're traveling, no need to stop. Real spacious restrooms. And so it is a unique mode. And again, that productive time when thinking about travel time, I think is really important. And it's those features of this mode that really drive ridership and revenue, which in turn drives the economic impact.
Great. So we're just going to speak theoretically for a second. So let's say, Amtrak, it's here in Central Ohio, and I want to go from Columbus to Chicago. Do we have any idea where the train station would be located?
So, Elizabeth, you asked me that question, and there are about 7 mayors and county commissioners in the room, at least 7, who are all saying, well, yes, it's going to be in Gahanna, Hilliard, Columbus, Whitehall, Delaware, Crestline. I know I'm missing somebody. This study that we're going to do is going to get at where those stops should be. And I think of course, there'll be one in Columbus and Chicago, one in Columbus and Cleveland, but I think when we look at the opportunity here, where you start is not with, if you're familiar with transit at all, you don't start with local service. So you don't have 100 stops on the way to Cleveland. You have a few critical ones to serve the market, and then you can build it. So.
Great. So what cities of a similar size to Columbus have had success with rail, commercially and or for travel? Correct. Right.
Well, I would give the example of Milwaukee. So Milwaukee has 7 round trips daily between Milwaukee and Chicago, and that has had so in 2003 the service increased to 7 round trips, and between then and 2019 the ridership with no other changes just over doubled, and the economic impact that has had on Southeast Wisconsin, I don't think can be overstated. So it's about Southeast Wisconsin being able to compete to retain jobs and companies so close to Chicago. And this Hiawatha service has provided a lifeline for employers to stay in Southeast Wisconsin. Just to give a few companies like Molson Coors, SC Johnson, big corporate presence in Wisconsin. And they also have corporate offices. You'll see them right outside of Chicago Union Station. They literally have hundreds of people on these trains every day going back and forth, or people who live in one place and work in another. And with teleworking, that has not really had a significant reduction in that activity from these companies. In fact, in some cases, it increases the usage of the train. So big economic impact in Southeast Wisconsin from a service like this in terms of attracting and retaining employers.
So one more question for you. So what does the timeline look like? Are we talking about a couple years? Like, would we just like to get an understanding of that?
Sure. Going through this this federal process, which will get you ultimately to hopefully design and construction of improvements to implement the service, could take around 5 years. There is the service planning and the environmental work that you have to do that could take a couple of years, and then a year for final design of the infrastructure, and then 2 years for construction.
Great.
So somewhere in that time frame.
Okay, and my last question for the panelists is, what can all of us do that are listening to you speak today to help move this forward?
I think to help move it forward, reach out to your state legislators and your senators. They're working on a budget right now, and there are dollars in consideration. There's also legal language that needs support that will allow this to move forward more precisely. And I think anybody can do that. It's really simple. I know we think that our legislators are just so busy that they can't even take the time to talk to us. Call up there and you would be surprised. They answer the phone, and you can leave your message. You can sometimes catch a legislator in there, and also easily email using templates on the web. So I would say reach out to your legislators, let them know, share with your friends. Social media, All Aboard Ohio has a social media for Facebook and Twitter. forward out the information to your friends, family, let them know what's going on. So those are just some little ways that you can help without having to get out there on the streets with a sign or anything.
Okay. And we're going to move to questions from our live stream and from the in-person audience as well. So if you have a question, please make your way to the microphone with Jane Scott there in the back corner. If you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. Before we take audience questions, I just asked my last question. Do you want to answer, Arun, about what I asked? So like, what can we do to move this forward?
Sure. I think that engagement of the business community, of large corporations, of chambers is absolutely key. In a lot of cases, this may not be on the radar of companies that are really interested in this, could benefit from it, especially when they're trying to retain or to attract talent. So engagement of the business community and communication then from the business community to the decision makers, I think, is absolutely key.
And I'd want to double down on that because this has been a core part of what's changed is, our partners at One Columbus and the Columbus Partnership, the CEOs around Central Ohio the chambers have been laser focused on this, continue to reach out to them, let them know it's important. Local leaders, whether it's your mayor, your county commissioner, they're working hard to try to do this. Letting them know it's still important is critical. And frankly, telling your story, like reach out, social media, telling about how this would be important to you, whether it's access for someone who needs access or benefits you because you think it's fun or because it helps business. Telling that story is going to continue the momentum for it.
Agreed. So I see everyone is lined up with Jane Scott. Just want to remind everyone, out of respect for others, please keep your questions brief and to the point so that we can get to as many as possible. And please also keep in mind that questions do end with a question mark. I'll take it over to you.
And I have a ton of questions, and I think there's a few here. So I'll ask my question quickly. You answer the question quickly, and we'll get as many in as possible. And we'll do every other one from on side. So one question, is there organized opposition, and what are they saying, and how do you address their concerns and their criticism?
Well, I think no matter the question, there's always folks who are proponents and opponents. The quick answer is right now, there is so much broad-based support for this, whether it's businesses or advocates or community leaders. And I think it's important to focus on those proponents and move forward with that.
I would just add that, there's a lot of questions, and rightly so, of how much is this going to cost, both the capital cost and ongoing operating support that would be needed. But it is absolutely critical, and this study that is going to be going on with the FRA once we're in this program, to communicate the economic impacts and return on that investment and make the business case, and that's what is going to be able to be done as we go into this process.
All right, Jeffrey Fell, Geosite. Thank you for all the panel members. It's a great conversation. You can tell there's a lot of interest. I love traveling by train. I do so for work in Europe and Northeast, but I wanted to play devil's advocate and talk about demand for a second. So it works from Boston to New York because both towns have public transportation when you get off the other side. Same in Europe. But I've also lived in North Carolina where it takes 2.5 hours to go from Durham to Charlotte, but you're 2.5 miles from going to a ball game in Charlotte when you get off the train. So you don't do it. Nobody does it. And it also takes an hour longer by train. So I challenge the 79 miles an hour because that's not true, right? But it takes an hour longer to go from Raleigh to Washington, D.C. That car, when, we're talking about Washington, D.C. with traffic, that's the same distance as it is from Cincinnati to Cleveland. And of the 3 cities we're talking about in Ohio, only one has public transportation, Cleveland. So, okay. If you're a business person, you're not taking the bus. So,
If you're racist, you want it.
okay, well, sure. Okay. So the question, look, can we talk, we're talking about demand. We need to get that 110 miles an hour, but you say it's going to take time. If you want people to ride, it sounds like we're putting the cart before the horse. So how do you build this demand and make sure that we get our return on our investment, in a reasonable amount of time? As a person who loves trains.
So the question that I'm hearing is, I think about the business case for this. And I think when you look at the markets, let's just pick out 3C and D for example, the population along that potential route is the same as you would see in some really high use areas around the country. It's the same as the Virginia corridor. It's the same as the Seattle to Portland corridor. And that's where you start, is looking at that business case. The other part of it is where the stops are. And these are the questions that we're going to answer, because yes, when you're taking the train, you want to be car competitive or close to it. But when you get to your destination, your destination is not the train stop. You want to get to the next place. And the advantage that we have right now are pretty robust transit systems, of course, in our major cities. But we also have things like Lyft and Uber that make a difference. And we also are really cognizant, if we're going to really build market, we need to make sure the stations are in places that make a lot of sense, like airports. Or in Columbus, we're looking at where the 2 tracks for the routes that we're looking at are in the densest part of Columbus, next to the convention center. And the convention center's already designed their station. They've been so forward thinking. So yes, what we want to do to make sure this is successful is to consider those business cases. But I think it's really important to know that Ohio is a large state. The population centers we're talking about are enormous. And you look around the country, and those routes with that type of population are very successful if you do it correctly.
Thanks.
There are so many questions. I'm trying to consolidate some. There are a lot of questions about the quality of the freight tracks, both in terms of safety and comfort and the reality of getting to an average 79 mile an hour speed compared to a high speed of 70 mile. Can you talk more about what the plan will assure the safety and the quality of these rails being improved?
Sure, yeah. So for passenger rail speeds of 79, that triggers a level of maintenance that has to be maintained to what's called a Class 4. That has a robust level of maintenance level. When you go to 90 miles an hour, that triggers additional grade crossing and other safety improvements. Grade crossings, not just lights and gates, but quad gates or crossings with medium barriers. Same to 110. And then when you go above 110, then you're talking about grade separated, which we're not looking at here. But safety is absolutely paramount. And I do think that safety of the railroads that intercity passenger rail would be implemented on would be enhanced by this, and we will all operate a safe service.
Rick Secker. I'm a little discouraged to hear about the 5-year time frame, because people who can't drive, shouldn't drive, or don't want to drive are effectively stranded in Central Ohio if they want to go to other Ohio cities or places like Pittsburgh, because literally the only option to driving is Greyhound, and Greyhound is in a state of collapse in Ohio. What do we do for the next 5 years to travel?
I mean, thanks for the question, Cleve. I mean, it speaks to one of the things that, yes, the business case is important. Yes, we want options for business or travel, but access is a really important issue. We have an employee who talks about his grandma in Springfield, and she doesn't have that option to get around. And what does she do for the next 5 years? I know that at Morpsey, part of what we do is we work with, yes, CODA, but also the rural transit providers and the human services transportation providers in the counties in Central Ohio to try to connect them to those options. That won't get them to Pittsburgh, but it could get them to necessary services. It could get them to the airport. It could get them to those other options in the meantime.
And I'll just say, I appreciate that question, and we at Amtrak really understand that need, and that's why we're here. We want to do whatever we can, working with our state partners and the FRA to move these things along as best they can go in the process. I will say that I'm optimistic more than ever before that these things will start to move a little quicker because of this quarter ID pipeline program that's been developed that hasn't happened before. So I'm optimistic there.
I'm John Lowe. what routes are being considered? For example, is Chicago to Florida through Ohio a possibility?
Well, the routes that we're working on in Ohio that our organization's been involved with, yes, Cleveland to Columbus, Dayton to Cincinnati, and some stops in between. We're working at Pittsburgh to Newark to the airport to Columbus on up to the northwest towards Lima, Fort Wayne, Chicago. Those are the two key routes that we're working on. We also know that if we get to those destinations, that opens up a lot. Chicago is probably one of your biggest hubs on the Amtrak network. That's why we want to get to Chicago. Yes, Pittsburgh's a great city, but we also want to get to Pittsburgh because that opens up the East Coast corridor to us. If we get to Cleveland, that opens up, potentially Toronto, Buffalo, Cincinnati, that opens up DC. So the key thing for Central Ohio right now is we need connections to these other hubs so we can get to those places.
Hi, Jim Hartman. I remember when Governor Kasich turned down the money when he was in office. The money went to Florida instead, and the governor's reason for turning down the money was he didn't want to commit the state of Ohio to decade after decade of maintenance requirements after the train started running. So my question is, what, if anything, can we do to head that objection off, in advance? Because I understand you said that there's a study is underway to see what those dollars are going to amount to.
Sure, I can start with that. Again, things are very different now, especially with these federal programs. A very important federal program now that is available for new services is that federal funding can be applied for to help cover what would be the state operating support for the first 6 years of service. And that's designed to be that 6 years, a startup period during which ridership and revenue will ramp up and build, and then the need for operating support will be less. So that is a huge opportunity that's going to change the dynamic. But also I would say, again, the business case and the return on investment of ongoing support will be important to communicate once we have those numbers.
Had a number of questions in this area too. Many people have traveled by rail in Europe and Asia and everywhere else. How do you control the expectations of folks who are going to be facing in a very different rail environment in the Midwest?
I mean, I worry about people who go up to Michigan and see the 110-mile-per-hour service. not to diminish your expectations as an international leading community. I think it's important to look at the experience. And we're, yes, car competitive, but we've talked a lot about the comfort of the train, the availability of different options when you're on the train. Those are things that I think will surprise people, that if we have access to that, we haven't had it before. And I think that's going to be compelling as we look at how to get to faster speeds. I think the experience is an important part.
Yeah, I would agree that safe, reliable, and very comfortable transportation option that is travel time competitive. It's not European or Chinese or Japanese speeds, but it is a profound, I think, option and change of what's available in this part of the world.
Yeah, it's more if you say it in metric, though. Lee Martin, CTL Engineers. I just wanted to reinforce Mr. Murdoch's comments because I came from the Central Ohio Builders Exchange construction conference this morning, and they talked in the economic forecast section about how the Midwest is going to be the economic driver of the country in the years and decades to come. So those comments were very apropos, and they're being said at OSU today as well. Also, I worked years ago in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is the heart of Amish country, and I could get on Acela and go to DC or Philly or any place like that. And what a marvelous thing personally and professionally for business. Plus, they don't tell you to shut your phone off. And then in Miami, to overcome the first mile issue that was brought up earlier, first and last mile, you can get on a big train in West Palm Beach transfer at an intermodal station to a light rail, and then transfer to an autonomous trolley and go all through downtown Miami, and you can be there in half the time it takes to drive a car. So those are my comments. Thank you.
And we have no middle seat and no security lines.
I'm Bill Allman. I have a vast transportation career. My first question is, why don't all of you who want to see how a grassroots All Aboard Ohio organization works come to our meeting this Saturday morning at the Grandview Public Library at 10 a.m. and air out there? You'll have very good listeners. My second real question is, warranted or not, to some people, Amtrak has a bad stigma in the Midwest. So my question is, why don't you think about trying to relabel the service to a name that would not have any association with a bad stigma? When I am in Columbus and I want to go to Cincinnati, I would love to take the Cincinnati Rapid.
Amtrak, we don't have passenger rail in Central Ohio. They said, we don't? And the moment we said, no, we don't, they said, well, then what do we need to do to fix that? And to Thea's point, telling that story and making that awareness, because the employees they're trying to recruit to Columbus, the employees they're trying to invest in, they're expecting to have those options. And that's really important. We've been out at chambers of commerce's, Mid-Ohio Development Exchange efforts, Rotary clubs, wherever we can, to get the message out about how this is something that we could really benefit from. So there's a lot more to do. So if you're looking to invite us for that, let us know.
Quick question. We talked a little about track, but we obviously had Amtrak before, so there's obviously the used track that's there. How much infrastructure do we have to build? And also the track that's down, will it handle 70 to 110 mile an hour trains?
Sure. So the CSX and the NS for the trains that would be operating on the 3C corridor would be on have a great deal of freight traffic, as you all know. So there would need to be significant capacity improvements, probably additional main line in certain segments, sidings, crossovers, et cetera. On some parts of the former National Limited, right? I mean, there are parts of that that would need to be rebuilt completely. And similarly for, as you mentioned, Chicago, Fort Wayne, Columbus, great right of way there. It would need some track rebuilding and significant improvements though for passenger service.
Yeah, and just to add to that, this application we're making to the Federal Railroad Administration will help answer those questions. It'll help lay out where we need to make those improvements. And I'll just finish by saying it's so important in Central Ohio that as we get bigger, we grow better. And that means we need more options in transportation, but that also means we need to invest, and we need to invest it really soon. We're growing quickly, investing in all different transportation modes, especially passenger rail and freight rail, to improve that. That's really a big part of growing better.
Well, everyone, I do wish we had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal. So I'll hand it over to Doug Buchanan with closing remarks.
All right. Well, I hope you found today's forum lively. It was certainly livelier than I was expecting. And I hope, I feel like sometimes we're preaching to the choir here at CMC. So definitely take these discussions back to your workplaces, back to your friends and family networks, because I agree. We need to convince people of the need for this for our future. All right, thank you to today's sponsor, Thea Ewing and HNTB, the whole crew there. Thank you to the Grange Insurance Audubon Center for its support. Thank you to all our virtual seat patrons and to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for supporting today's live stream. And a very special appreciation to today's speakers, William Murdoch, Aaron Rao, Aaron Roselio, and Elizabeth Blunt McCormick. Let's have a round of applause for them. Please make plans now to attend next Friday's forum, Central Ohio Bankers Roundtable. It will be back here at the Grange Insurance Audubon Center. Please note that it is a Friday due to a scheduling conflict here. Please also take a moment to answer the short survey that's in your forum flyers. Thank you, everyone. We couldn't do this without you. Have a great rest of the day.